record and share. The last words that we read last week were Isaac then brought into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife, and Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death. And so we read about this relationship that becomes one of love and also one of healing. It allows Isaac to find comfort. And again, obviously, a wife doesn't replace a mother, but there is something to be said for the fact that, especially, and I have no issue saying this, especially for men, the love and the support that they oftentimes get from their mothers there really isn't any, and there is no relationship that comes close to that with the exception of the love and support that they oftentimes get from their wives. So again, it's not the same, and I don't mean to say that we marry our mothers or that kind of comment, which does oftentimes seem to happen, but we do know that kind of comfort oftentimes happens, not necessarily as it did for Isaac, bang, bang, one and then the next, but it definitely happens that, that's kind of how, at least in my experience, it was my wife that really was able to comfort me and to be able to help me through the loss of my mother in a way that I don't know that I would have been able to have if I didn't have a wife. I don't know if I would have been able to feel that. And I think it would have made, I can't say, and I don't want to think about it, but I think it would have made that loss even more difficult. So there's a powerful truth to that. And again, it's not just sons and their wives, and, it also goes between, other relationships, but that is the words that we find that someone felt comfort after a loss is something beautiful and true that is there. And again, the fact that he loved her is something that is also not something that we always see in the Bible. We don't always know that people love each other in the Bible, and when we see it, it makes us pay attention to it, and it makes us remember that there is that did exist. It wasn't just people got married for business or for family relations and for procreation and all the business aspects, but that people also had love. So interestingly, as we begin today, we read about another marriage. And this is not a marriage that a lot of people know about or talk about, because it says in chapter 25 that Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. Now, a lot of people don't remember that Abraham got married again, namely because we already know that he's well into his hundreds. Wouldn't seem like he needed to be married again, but maybe he also needed to have love and comfort in his life. And so he married somebody. Now, what also is interesting is that he didn't just marry for love and comfort, though, because he also had more children. And this was maybe again, is it part of the divine plan? I don't know. But I will tell you that these children of Abraham that come about in the next round of kids become important. Because as we know, Abraham's early children, his first children, Ishmael first, and then Isaac, become the ancestor for the Arabs and for the Jews. But what we also know is that he has more sons: Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. And what we know about these people is that they become ancestors of more people as well, more nations. So these are not just people that are named, these are nations that get named, because Yokshan begot Sheva and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Ashurim, the Letushim, and the Leumim. And the descendants of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Enoch, Abidah, and Eldah. All these were the descendants of Keturah. So what's interesting about this is that we actually read that these children become ancestors of other people. Because it doesn't just say that they have children, but that they have nations and people that come out of them. And one of the things that we know about is the people of Sheva, that's the queen of Sheba, is a descendant of these people. Midian, mentioned many times in the Bible, the Midianites are actually descendants of Abraham. They're Hebrews. They're our relatives. So the Midianites are maybe not, they're not Jewish, but they're B'nai Avraham. They're children of Abraham, which means, at least from our standpoint, the biblical standpoint, and maybe the Jewish political ideology, or the Jewish, when politics meets theology, we'd have to understand these people as our relations. And they're not just people that are we can dismiss necessarily as, foreigners, or people that we don't understand, or people that we can't, we shouldn't deal with. It's complicated because they're Midianites and they're descendants of Abraham, which of course means that Moses's wife, Zipporah, who's a Midianite, whose father Yitro, Reuel, or it's also called Hobab, different names for him in the Torah. It says he's a priest of the Midianites. He's a Midianite, which means that while Zipporah was not Israelite, she's not a descendant of Jacob, she is a descendant of Abraham. So they're not completely different peoples. So all of these people come out of Keturah.
I did not know that. I did not realize that. That's really fascinating, because they all do show up later on. The Queen of Sheba shows up with Solomon, and I guess I wouldn't say Zipporah was like really super accepting of Moses's ways, but she does it, and maybe that's part of it. I mean, the circumcision, like it makes it different. It seems different knowing that Abraham is her descendant as well.
Yeah, that she's from that part of our lineage. She's off that tree, right? She's a branch off that tree. So it does change our feelings about them, or should at least inform our understanding of who these people are.
Definitely.
Now, we don't know anything about Keturah. We don't know where she was from. We don't know how she came in. The Midrash doesn't like that. The rabbis don't like her just popping up out of nowhere. So there is a Midrash, and the Midrash is, and why I'm sharing with you this Midrash is because sometimes you'll see some interesting statements made that are not based on the Torah. They're based on the Midrash. You'll see sometimes it'll say that this wife was not a new wife, was actually Hagar. And sometimes it's just said that this is Hagar, and it's in the Midrash, it's not here, it's just a separate name. So how do they come up with this idea that this could be Hagar? Well, the name Keturah means crown. It's from the root keter, which means a crown, that you wear. And so some people say that, or the Midrash says, I would say, and the people who follow this tradition, was that Abraham brings her back and crowns her and makes her his official wife. Look, it's a possibility. The reason for it is that they don't like a new woman being introduced. They also don't kind of want Hagar to be, disappear completely. There's also this kind of idea that it wasn't really fair that she got sent away in the first place, right? So all of these things are possibilities for why the Midrash wants it to be. And the Midrash also just doesn't like unknown people, doesn't like people popping up with no backstory. So that's the reasons we have those Midrashim. I will tell you though that the idea that Avraham, who had such a hard time having children, then we know he had child, we know he had Ishmael with Hagar, but then it becomes much more the problem of why they didn't have children with Sarah, right? And so then the emphasis goes even more on her, because here you have a guy who's in his perhaps 150 years old that's going around having more kids. So, all of these are possibilities. Remember, I mean, he's 137 when this happened, when his wife dies. So there is that understanding that, this was, he didn't necessarily have to have more kids at this point, but he's called Avraham. He's called the father of many nations. And to some extent, this fulfills that prophecy that he will become the father of many nations, even during his own lifetime, right? So that, it's not just left to us to do this. And in reality, he wouldn't be the father of many nations unless, again, with Ishmael and us, I mean, and the Edomites, because Isaac's other son, Edom, is another nation, but you'd have three nations. You'd have the Edomites, the Ishmaelites, and the Israelites. That would be three. I don't know if that'd be many. I don't know if that qualifies for many, but this definitely now qualifies for many. And by the way, though, the rabbis will tell you that the Ishmaelites represent all of the Arabs, and maybe you could even say all Muslims. And then they'll also tell you that the Edomites represent, or later became representative of Rome and then the church, which would mean all Christians. And then the Jews, of course, are represented as the children of Jacob. So those three nations by themselves would represent Christian, Jews, and Muslims, which would be a lot of people. But this is actually, in the biblical world and the biblical times, would be lots of people. So this actually fulfills the biblical promise that Abraham would indeed know in his own lifetime, that, he has got a lot of kids, and they're going to be, I guess maybe he wouldn't know that there are going to be a lot of nations, but it actually now seems possible that promise that God gave him, this now seems like it's going to happen. But the next line is, but Abraham willed all that he owned to Isaac. But to Abraham's sons by concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east, which explains why these people are not given territory in the land of Israel, and why they're also given gifts, but they're not given any of the property that Abraham has. That all goes to Isaac, which, by the way, implies that also Ishmael didn't get any real stuff, that he would have gotten gifts, but that the will, and again, I mentioned this before, if you specify in a will, I'm giving these people these things, and then you say, and everything else goes to Isaac, and that would have been essentially saying that, he left everything to Isaac, with the exception of certain gifts, certain things that were itemized for everybody else. So that means, by the way, if somebody comes forward, I want to make that clear. From Jewish law, this is actually important, because if somebody comes up, like, so if he said, well, I'm giving Isaac 90% of the stuff and I'm giving everybody else 10%, that's different than saying I'm giving Isaac 100% and then I'm giving essentially 10% of what exists to everybody else. Because, and this does happen, if somebody came up later, a year later, and says, we just found that Abraham had another piece of land, or he had another bag of gold, if 90% of it is going to Isaac, then 90% goes to Isaac, and 100%, and the other 10% goes out. If something else comes up later, it's not part of those gifts. Those have already been gifted, and it's done. 100% of that new bag, or that new thing that comes out, is Isaac's, which again means that any other property or any of the other money that's being generated later on from stuff is still Isaac's. So that's a big issue. That's a big difference between saying, well, they really split up stuff 90-10. Well, no, they didn't. He got 100%, and then these people got the stuff. So now we read, the span of Abraham's life was 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good, ripe age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin. I'd say so. I would say he did live to be a long age. 175 is pretty much well beyond what you're supposed to live at 120. It's not the longest. Isaac's going to last 180. So Isaac lasts even a little bit longer. Interesting, the fact that Isaac, and then it goes back, and then Jacob doesn't. Jacob lives to 157, so it actually kind of goes down, but it's still very long life, much longer than normal.
There's something about the names of Abraham's wives that kind of reflect where he is in his own journey. Like Hagar, when they have a child, he's still a stranger in the land. But then when him and Sarah have a child, he's like a prince. He hasn't really established himself. But then when he has kids with this last one, he's like a king with a crown.
Okay.
It's almost like those names reflect his own position of power and journey throughout his life.
Yeah, except what about Sarah?
Well, when he's with her, she's Sarah means princess. So when he has the child with her, not when he's married to her or gets married to her, but when he has a child with her, he's just establishing himself in the land. He's not quite a king yet, right? I mean, it's just a thought, but it's
nice. It's a nice midrash that
there's something about.
So when they first get married, she's like
Well, Hagar is the one he first has a child with, right?
I like that. So he's up here, then he goes down to Egypt, and he goes down. He's a stranger, and then when he's back up with Keturah, he's like crowned again.
He's like the king. He's raised himself through each child. He's become more and more powerful, right? With Ishmael, he's still a stranger in the land. With Isaac, he's established himself, but he's not quite a king. And then with these last children, he's a king in that land.
Nice.
Because women were more of a reflection of their husband at the time than they were real.
No, but the idea that their names reflect that, I think, is wonderful. I think it's a great idea.
Cool.
I like that. So that is the fact that he dies. And what does it say? Of course, that he is going to be buried in the cave. But look what it says. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, facing Mamre. That field that Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. Now, interestingly, it doesn't say what's going to happen with the other women, but maybe, Keturah, maybe Hagar, maybe these other women will be buried there too. We don't know. It doesn't say that, but it does say he gets buried next to Sarah, his wife. So it takes us back to what we read about last week, which was the cave of Machpelah, that now he has a place to be buried. But what is beautiful about this is that Isaac and Ishmael come together to bury their father. So we do not know the interaction or lack of interaction between the time that Ishmael got sent away till this moment. So what do we do with this information? The fact that they do come back together, that there is and we don't know that they didn't get along. I mean, we just know that Sarah didn't want Ishmael around. But what do we take away from the fact that they come back together to bury their father? What is the takeaway, if you will, from the fact that Isaac and Ishmael bury him together? And obviously the rabbis take this as a good thing about Ishmael, that he comes back to do this, because essentially we've already just read 2 verses above this that he willed everything he had to Isaac. So Ishmael, I mean, I guess you could say Ishmael doesn't know that. He wants to maybe see if there's something, but the rabbis usually don't go there. They usually don't say that Ishmael came back to see if he's getting anything extra in the will.
Well, it seems as though there doesn't have to always be war between Jews and Muslims. If they can get together on family affairs, they can talk and they can negotiate and they can be friends.
Yes, and perhaps again, the key is in recognizing those places where we have commonality, those issues where we can say
Right.
we draw from the same source, from Abraham. And so I think that's crucial. Now I will tell you that as we read this, it's difficult to not think about what happened last week, because that was the nightmare scenario that we have, which is that there'll be Islamic terror directed at Jews. And again, I don't want to get into the fact the FBI didn't recognize that at first, but they didn't. They walked it back and then said it was. But a lot of people, including myself, got very upset that this was not recognized immediately. But I will tell you, and it's something that I've been thinking about, and I will tell you right now, as I tell you what I'm going to tell you, you're going to know that I've been thinking about it because I looked it up for my own sense of what we have to remind ourselves about, which is that we do know, and we've talked about the fact that the Jews lived under Arab control for a long time, and again, for a lot of the last, especially 1400 years since Islam existed, there were many times when the situation for Jews was better under Islamic dynasties than it was under Jewish Christian dynasties. It's not always the fact, but overall, it's been claimed, and it's verifiably true overall. And when the Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492, they came to Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Turks said, "We'll be more than happy to have you people. You Sephardic Jews will make a great addition to our community." And they did. The Sephardic Jews settled all over Turkey and Greece and all over the Ottoman Empire, what is today's, Yugoslavia, what was Yugoslavia. Anyways, the Jews fared very well. Now, that being said, it's very important for people today to understand this. Of the, 1.5 billion or so Muslims in the world, 700 million of them, half of those Muslims are not from the Middle East, from the standpoint of they're not from areas where Jews lived, meaning Iran, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, places where Jews lived, Turkey. Those areas are not the majority of Islam today. The majority of Islam today is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. You add up those countries, those 4 countries, the largest Islamic country in the world is Indonesia. The 2 of the 5 largest are Pakistan and Bangladesh, and India has over 150 million Muslims. If you look at those countries, there was very, very little contact with the Jewish community. And we have a problem in that Pakistan has a horrible anti-Semitic and anti-Israel education, and it's terrible. They have no contact or no understanding of Jews. There was never really a large Jewish community in Pakistan. And some of the problems that we're going to have, including this last weekend, are and again, it's not that there isn't anti-Jewish rhetoric amongst Palestinians and against, I didn't even say that, right? Against people in the Middle East. Obviously there is, but at least there was some kind of recognition and understanding in those communities. And there are people in Iraq who say, look, I remember when there were Jews living in this country, and they were good citizens. They helped Baghdad, they helped, Damascus and Syria. These were great additions to our community. It would be great if they could come back. Not so in Pakistan, not so in Bangladesh. There were not Jewish communities. There was a small Jewish community in India, but not a lot of contact. And so it's a very big problem that these communities are really only hearing negativity and have no contact or understanding. And that is one of the big problems that we have today. And this last terror attack and some of the terror attacks we've had before, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, these people are Pakistani, and a lot of these people have no understanding of Jews other than negativity and other than what they've read in their own in their own culture. And so this is a huge problem. I will tell you that the work that I do, and when I talk to people from Pakistan, it's really from almost ground zero, where they really don't understand. And I mean that ground zero in all ways. We're talking about some very ignorant, and unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do in order to understand and to have that area of the world, we call the subcontinent, or that part of India, and Pakistan, those groups have to understand and have to have a better understanding and positive understanding of Jews. So we really have to do that. And in places like Indonesia, where there's, again, you're talking about 250 million Muslims in these countries, it's just vital for us to have understandings between these communities. And so it's very much a case of not so much that it's not what you think. It's not in the Middle East. It's not in the area around Israel. It's the areas outside of Israel that are desperately in need of having education about Judaism. Desperately in. And
it's going to take centuries, however.
And Pakistan is just moving in the wrong direction, my friends. The people who are in charge of Pakistan right now have disseminated so much anti-Semitism that it's going to take years to root it out. It's going to take, yes, unfortunately, Joyce, it might take centuries, but I want you to understand that's the reality. When people say, but why is it so bad? It's bad because there's not even a baseline of understanding and relationship. Because I will tell you that, and again, unfortunately, by the way, I want to tell you this too, as Israel, as the expulsion of Jews, and it was expulsion, my friends. Jews were thrown out of Iraq and Syria. They were chased out, in some cases, again, literally under pain of death, were forced out of their country in the 50s after Israel was established. Those places are now going on 70 years of not having any Jews there. There are less and less people. I'm talking about these people are now in their 80s and 90s who remember their Jewish neighbors and say, no, that's not true. This person's a nice person. He was my Jewish neighbor. I know not all Jews are this or that. But when you have people who never come in contact with Jews, you're literally dealing with a problem of how do you erase, all the negativity when there's no relationships, when there's no actual friendships. So this is a tremendous problem. And it's something that people don't talk about because they just assume that everything is, every Muslim is the same or every country is the same. It's not. Every country is the same. Even if Israel has relationships with, like they do, thank God now, with UAE and with some of these other countries, that's not what's needed. There needs to be real understanding, and this anti-Semitism needs to be rooted out of countries like Pakistan. They cannot continue to educate their kids to basically see Jews as a threat. And I know this exists because I talked to Pakistani Americans who've lived here for a few generations. We had, after 9/11, we had a Pakistani American come to our synagogue. It was the first time he ever went to a synagogue. And it was right after 9/11. And he said, look, I've never been to a synagogue before. I've never had any understanding of who the Jewish community is. And that guy, Tariq, was the first time he ever went to a synagogue, was after 9/11. And this was an adult Pakistani educated, person who works in, business and, successful. That's what we're dealing with. So we have a lot of work to do, lots of work to do, scary amount of work to do. So
Isn't there a Jewish community in India?
There is, but it's very small. And now it's even smaller, but it was in Cochin. There were very, very, again, it was a nice community, it was well protected, but it was not in majority, for the most part, it was not a majority Islamic cities. There was a fairly large Jewish community in Mumbai and Bombay, which has a large Islamic population. So there was some contact there, but in the area of Bangladesh, of Bengal, and in the area on the east, on the west in Pakistan, in the Sindh and Punjab, very, very small Jewish communities, never large Jewish communities in those parts of India. Most of it was along the coast and in the bigger cities. So it was not in those areas that eventually became the Muslim countries of Pakistan and Bangladesh. So I'm thinking about this right now, coming together, and hopefully we can come together with the Islamic world. It is a critical thing, especially when you see the person being from India and from and from Pakistan.
We have another problem, Rabbi.
And by the way, I just want to say one other thing. The
Okay.
attacks that happened a few years ago in Mumbai, where the Chabad house was attacked and the Chabad rabbi and his wife were killed. Remember that happened. That was an attack, part of a big attack on not just Jewish sites in Mumbai on that horrific night, but that was also perpetrated by Islamic terrorists in India. So yeah, sorry.
What I wanted to add was we have to worry about education even here in our country, because if the FBI reacted to the Texas incident that it wasn't against Jews, there is lack of understanding in our FBI, and they are Americans.
I will tell you that yes, one of the things that we saw this week was this last weekend was a horrific attempt to not offend people, and by not offending people, lying about what had happened. And
Yes.
again, they did walk it back, but that never should have happened.
They had to be forced to walk it back.
It never should have happened. It was,
Right.
I was shocked. I was shocked at what had happened. And I know why they did it. They didn't want to inflame religious tensions, and they don't want people to, but I'm telling you, I couldn't believe it. I literally was watching this and saying, how could you not be reporting on this? First of all, CNN didn't even report on they would not talk about what was happening when it was being reported on in other news sources. And it wasn't just Fox. ABC was also reporting on the fact that this was a Pakistani British visitor. The CNN would not broadcast that for the first few hours, and he knew it. Every other news source that was that was trying to get the news out was saying it, and they didn't want to do it because they didn't want to offend people. This is a problem, and I get it, because unfortunately there are idiots out there that are going to make dumb statements, but you can't not tell the truth because of that. That's not the answer. The answer is not to. Right. And again, it was the same thing of, as I'm sitting here now dealing with an illness that we're not holding China accountable for. I don't understand what has to happen for people not to worry about hurting other people's feelings. So, it's got to stop. And
well,
these are things that are
there's a huge problem when you do try to hold China accountable, and then Americans take it out on Chinese Americans.
I understand. I get it. I know the reason, but you can't not say the truth because of that.
Need reality.
It's not
to deal with reality.
I understand. Deal with the problem of racism. I'm not saying if people attack Chinese Americans because of it, prosecute those people and arrest them.
Right.
That's not there, but you can't not speak the truth because of it, and you must hold China accountable for this. Stop. Yeah. They know it. They've said it. They just said
it was hard watching
because they didn't want to upset China.
I was watching CNN talk about it, and the guy he could barely pronounce the word anti-Semitism, which I thought was just, he was choking on how to even pronounce it, and I thought, this is just ridiculous. This is CNN. But the thinking also behind this guy who wants to hold Jews hostage to release an Afghanistan prisoner in America. Why would he even think that was the way to go? That was going to somehow solve it?
Exactly. Because
how did he think
because
they went to be to see there? I didn't.
Okay, but here's the thing. So the point of why did he pick a synagogue? He targeted a synagogue. How many churches, how many buildings did he have to pass by before he found the synagogue near the airport?
Right.
So and for some reason he thought the synagogue was the way to go.
Okay, because that's the way he's been educated in his community.
Right.
That if you attack the Jewish community, that is, and again, if Jews die, then there's going to be a reaction to it. But
he actually thinks that we have the power to release this prisoner. That's what's insane.
Partly, but it's also because, again, it's part of a whole narrative where literally the Jewish people are the world's enemy.
Right.
That's how he's been educated.
And we're apparently in control of everything, the banks, the prisons, everything. And we have the power to release people. Just
Yeah.
ridiculous. I mean,
So-
there's no
so-
logic
So
there.
that, but also
no
the fact
thinking.
is, if Jews had been killed, then then Jews have died. So it's also part of a script that's been written out for these people. And yeah, we're characters in this story. So
And yet we're only 1% of the population in the world. And I
no,
always say,
we're 1% of the population in America. We're not even a hundredth of a percent of the population of the world. So that's the problem.
but we're the one saying why. We're the one standing out saying, screaming out loud why. And I think that's why we get so much attention.
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
This has now become another weekend where we've seen what what happens when years of anti-Semitism have been
It's allowed to fester and grow.
in a country. So yeah,
Um,
and unfortunately, my friends, this is what's happening in countries with a huge population of people from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, because this is what's happening in England right now, which is where my wife is from, and it's just astounding what is coming out of that world now. So
to bring it back to Ishmael and Isaac, I think that no matter how you feel about your sibling, you show up to bury your father.
yeah, and what did he feel about his own about that father?
I don't know that either one of them felt real great about their father. I mean, one gets thrown out, the other one almost gets sacrificed. So, but they show up to bury him. I mean, I do see a lot of, people, because of what I do see a lot of people right at the end of their life, and the families, no matter how they feel about each other, they do show up for their parents and to bury them and say goodbye.
That's what we hope, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complicated stuff that goes on with them, but for the most part, they show up.
That's what we hope. Now, so what we know, of course, is that they have these other siblings that are all part of Abraham's family. We don't know what they did because, again, they're little kids at this point, or young kids. But it says that after the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled near Be'er Lahai Roi. And what's interesting is that is the area that also Ishmael had also been mentioned around. So not necessarily that they were even living that far apart. But now we get into the line of Ishmael. This is the line of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's slave, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Abdil, and Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, and Masa, Hadad, Tema, Yatur, Naphish, and Kedma. And it says, these are the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 chieftains of as many tribes. So he becomes an ancestor of 12 tribes. So Ishmael has 12 tribes. Just like Jacob will have 12 tribes, his sons also are like 12 tribes. So Ishmael's family already, again, we recognize, and the Torah recognizes, that they become important people, and that their cities become substantial enough as well. So that's good to know that they had importance. And it says these were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. It's a long time. Then he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his kin. They dwelt from Havilah by Shur, which is close to Egypt, all the way to Ashur. They camped alongside all their kinsmen. Now, it seems as though, at least here, we also kind of read that they live in the area of from Egypt all the way down the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula, which includes modern day Saudi Arabia, it includes Yemen, and it is the areas that became kind of the heartland, the original heartland of the Arab people, which is where we know where the Arab people actually started. Now, eventually, of course, they spread out all across the Middle East, but it also seems like they are living in camps, that these are people who are more nomadic and are living more like tribes people. But it does say that they also had cities. So there is a recognition that they have villages or cities, that they have or they at some point took up a more sedentary lifestyle and were living in a more cosmopolitan type situation with cities. But they also do have this idea that they're kind of tribes people, and that they also lived in a somewhat nomadic state too. Definitely the Midianites seem to be that way, because the Midianites, when they're described in the Bible, are almost always living in tents and in kind of a nomadic raider style, like literally people that would be in the desert and would sometimes make incursions during the time of Judges. We read about them making incursions into the land of Israel and raiding the cities of Israel, villages. And of course, we read about Moses going to live amongst Yitro and his family that goes out to the desert to do that, and that there must not have been too far away from Egypt, but that they definitely seem to be nomads, nomadic, pastoralists, people that we would call today Bedouin. Interestingly, the Bedouin peoples, genetically, some of the Bedouins are very connected to the Jewish people. They share some common ancestry to us. The Bedouin in not all Bedouin seem to have the same genetic history, but that some of the Bedouin tribes people are actually pretty connected to us, share some of the haplotypes that we do. So kind of is what the Torah tells us, which is that we share a common ancestor with some of those people. Now, as you can see, we get into another Torah portion. So even though we're only midway through the chapter 25, we actually begin another Torah portion. And the reason, of course, is that we actually are now going to turn our attention back to Isaac. And this is what we're going to read about today in this last part tonight. We're going to be reading about Isaac's family. And we actually, interestingly, have only read about Isaac getting married. And in that case, he doesn't really do anything. He has his wife brought to him and he marries her. He loves her. And we read he buried his father with Ishmael, which, by the way, is the only time, kind of building on what Sarah pointed out, we did not read, and if you were with us the last couple of weeks, we do not read of another conversation between Abraham and Isaac after the Akedah, after the binding. We never read about it. It doesn't exist. Isaac does not have a conversation with his father. We don't know that he ever sees his father other than when he sees him when he buries him. We don't know. Doesn't mean he doesn't. It just means that we don't have that in the Bible, which means that when we fill it in with our midrash and with our own imagination of what happened, we can go many different ways here. Could be that they did talk to each other, but it could be that they didn't. And that's a possibility. But as we read about Isaac now, and as you're about to see, don't really read about Isaac now. There will be a point, and we'll see if we get to it today, that we actually read an Isaac story. But there's really only stories where Isaac is a character, more as a participant, but not necessarily an active participant. So we're going to see that here today, because watch what happens. It begins, Ele Toldot, like these are the stories, or this is the generation of Isaac. And it says that Isaac was the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. And again, why do we have that repeated? To remind us that Isaac was absolutely the son of Abraham. There was no question about it. If you looked at them, they looked similar. There was never anybody who could say, maybe that's not Abraham's son. No, it doesn't even say that Sarah was his mom. It says that he was the son of Abraham. Now, that's not uncommon that the Bible refers to your father, but it seems like they went overboard in saying it, because why does it say this is the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham? Abraham begot Isaac. It doesn't need to say it again, but the Bible wants to remind us that maybe because it was such a miraculous birth, but also because lest you think that Sarah got pregnant any other way, nope, it was Abraham's. So, and by the way, lest you say, why would you say it? Well, because we read that Sarah was with two other guys, didn't necessarily sleep with them. Actually, the Bible seems to say that she didn't, but people could have spoken, people could have talked about it. And that's why, again, according to the sages, the rabbis said, that's why it says it here, to remind us that he most definitely was the son of Abraham. But it says that Abraham was 40 years old when he took his wife Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean. So here, not only do we remember that Rebekah is the daughter of Bethuel, which would be normal, but she's also the sister of Laban. Now, that's probably because Laban's about to be another character. In just about a chapter and a half, we're going to read about Laban. He's coming back. But it's also because he's a pretty important guy in the story, maybe even more important than his father. So we're reminded of that. And we're reminded that Isaac was 40 years old when he got married, which is pretty old. So he was 37 when his mother died. We know that. And here it says that he was 40 when he got married. So not long after he got married, but that's 40. That's already on the older side to get married. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord responded to the plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. So just like his mother wasn't easy for her to have children, it wasn't easy for his wife to have a child either. Now, unlike his mother, he did not repeat the mistake of going out and finding another wife to get pregnant. Doesn't do that. He pleads with the Lord on behalf of his wife. And God listened to him. So God listened to his prayer. That's a good thing. God had a prayer and he listened to it. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist? Why am I still here?" She said, why? It's that painful. And it says that she went to inquire of the Lord. So just like he prayed to God, she actually goes to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord answered her. Okay, well, he also responded to his plea, but here it says he actually answered her. And he actually tells her something, which also tells us that God most definitely talks to women. So if anybody said, well, does God talk to women? Well, he talks to the second matriarch. He actually talks to Rebekah. It's not a question. And he tells her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 separate peoples shall issue from your body. 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So she's told that there actually are 2 nations inside, and those nations are already fighting with each other. They're fighting with each other inside the womb. And she's also told that the younger one will actually be more powerful. So she's told that from the beginning. That's important for the story, right? As we're going to read next week, that's really important for the story. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red, like a hairy mantle all over, and so they named him Esau. And again, the name Esau is connected to the word for hair, which is Se'ar. So Se'ar and Esau are a play on each other. They sound similar. Then his brother emerged, holding on to the heel of Esau. And so they called him Jacob. Why? Because, here's the note, it's a play on the Hebrew word, which in Hebrew is right here. You can say Akev. Akev means heel. So Yaakov is a play on the word heel. So that's what his name means, heel. So he grabbed onto his brother's heel while he was coming out. And it says right here, Isaac was 60 years old when they were born, which means 20 years they were married when she couldn't conceive. So this went on for a long time. So he's older now when he's finally a dad. And that's important for our story, that he feels like he's an older dad. And it's important for our story and for our knowledge of this family that it was hard for her to get pregnant. And then when she was pregnant, it was difficult. So it's not easy, but now they're born. And that's what it says about the birth. Because the next line, it says, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in the camp. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. And again, the footnote here is game was in his mouth. Seems like, again, an idiom for somebody who hunted. Now, what's going on here in this story, right? Because that's all it says. There's two lines which establish these guys. But so much comes out of these two lines. So much has been written about, has been discussed. So much is wrapped around these verses. They're so, to use a better word, more appropriate, maybe pregnant with meaning. Because for us, Rebekah's children become archetypes, and they become much bigger than two people. And they become representations of different ways to live. One can make the argument, these aren't just two nations. This is a yin and yang. This is two opposites that are not brought together. The relationship between Jacob and Esau is going to be the theme over the next few chapters. Really kind of goes all the way to about chapter 36. It's really kind of a background. Even when Jacob is up in Syria and Aram, that's why he goes to Aram. That's why he goes there, is because of his brother. So it's in the background of this next part of the Bible, but to some extent, it's in the background of Jewish history. What happens here? And the rabbinic teaching on this that kind of sticks with us is that, and this is kind of like on the mystical side of things, that so you have to understand that, I guess, according to superstition or folk belief, it kind of exists inside the midrashic framework of birth, twins, is that twins are actually almost like one child that got split into two. Like that maybe there was supposed to be one child, but it got split. Now you can understand why. It's not like far-fetched to understand that a normal pregnancy will be one. And when two come out, it's almost as if they got split up and it could have been one. So then there's a question of is this an aberration? Is this meant to be? Is this a biblical, is there something at stake here that's much bigger than you and I? And there is that feeling here, especially with Jacob and Esau, which is that if these could have been one person, maybe humanity could have gone in a different direction. Because Jacob represents the he represents the intellectual side of a human, and Esau represents the physical side of a human.
Well, and
And
Esau is also the like hunter gatherer, and while Jacob is the farmer and shepherd, right?
well, yes and no, because yeah, I mean, they have those roles to play, but remember, the hunter gatherer is oftentimes the actual, or the nomad is better. I mean, neither the city person is not the good person. Does Esau to some extent is a hunter gatherer, but it's not the hunter gathering part. It's more that he actually, because he gets drawn to the Canaanites, he's more of actually the city person, whereas Jacob is more of the tent person, is more the nomad. So it's not so much hunter gatherer versus pastoralist. It's pastoralist versus a city person. There is that element to a Jacob and Esau, though. It's more, in this case, it's much more of a Esau's problem is that he is wild, right? And that he's physical, that he's dominated by his emotions and his
Urges.
passions, right? His urges, right? His passions. And so, the rabbis like to point out that his taste for game, for the hunt, is not just the animals that he hunts, but the women that he hunts, that he represents somebody who can't control his urges. As we're going to see, that he decides to marry the local women, which is a no-no for Abraham, and is a no-no for
Isaac and Jacob.
for yes, and Rebecca, it throws her out completely, and even Isaac doesn't seem to like it. And we know that Abraham didn't want his kids to marry amongst the local people. We saw that last week, right? And we saw what he does in order to make sure his son doesn't marry a local woman. And by the way, based on the math of what we would have, that at least maybe up until this point in time, Abraham might exactly be still alive, right? Because remember something, if we just read that Abraham was 175 when he died, right? And Isaac is 60 at this point. If we know that Abraham was about 100 when his son is born, right? And we read he's about 100, right? 99. If he's 99 and you add 60 years, that puts him at 160, which means that when the kids are born, he's still alive, which means that Abraham is still alive when these kids are teenagers. See, he sees, and again, I don't know what he sees, but he's also had kids, so he's not like completely out of it, but he sees his grandkids, and maybe Abraham is telling Isaac, I don't like the way this kid's turning out, but it doesn't matter because it says specifically that Isaac likes Esau. And Isaac likes him because it says he likes his taste for game. He likes that that Esau is a hunter. Isaac likes that. No matter whatever he sees in Esau, he likes it. And we've put out before that maybe it's because that Isaac himself didn't have that physicality, that Isaac saw himself maybe as a weak person, as a guy who was bound by his own father, that when he saw Esau as a tough guy, he lived vicariously with him as, again, the guy who doesn't have any athletic skill himself, but when his son becomes a great football player, he can't stop himself because he loves the fact that his son is a great athlete,
And we know that Isaac has problems with his eyes. We don't know from at what point they start.
Yeah.
But we know that he can't see very well as he gets older. Who knows if that was like something that has always been an issue. We just don't know.
The rabbis do comment on that, which is that Isaac's bad eyesight is not physical only, or isn't limited to the physical. It's his inabilities to see who his son really is, right? It's his inabilities to really understand who Esau is. What he's blind to is not being blind physically, but blind emotionally and psychologically to what his son really represents. And again, did he enable his son? Did he encourage his son? Because again, he didn't have those qualities. These are all the way we psychoanalyze Isaac and try to figure out why Esau becomes the way he is. Again, to some extent, it's almost as if his passions have run wild. And again, I've used this analogy before. It's the famous enemy within episode of Star Trek where, where Kirk gets split into two halves. And again, to some extent, this ultimate id that he becomes, that Kirk becomes when he's split, that it's only when he's put back together that Kirk is able to be whole, because he can't be the timid, guy, and he can't be the all passion guy, but he has to have both of those. He has to go back through the transporter and be reconnected together, because again, it's only as a whole person. And one could say that again, what really is represented here with Jacob and Esau is, a split that shouldn't exist. We would hope that people don't have, have a better integration of their physical and intellectual selves, but that could be going too far, because again, Jacob is our ancestor, and of course we like Jacob, and Jacob is the son that is going to become our ancestor. And it says that Rebecca loved Jacob and favored him. I mean, the word is ohevet, which is the word for love.
I can understand why the rabbis would say that about being blind, with because growing up with a blind grandfather, he always could tell who it was by the way that we walked, and there was no fooling him about who was who. So
yeah, well, that's the deeper level of when we read this, right? Is that's what it really means, and really a level of what it means to be blind is that when we don't see who the person really is. I look, it's fine to translate Rebecca favored Jacob. It's fine to translate it that. I like the translation that she loved Jacob. Now, again, she should have loved both of her sons, and maybe she did love both of her sons. But what I take away in the context of this line, this story that again is pregnant with so much meaning, if we understand that Esau was favored by his father, what Rebecca did by loving her son was give him and compensate for the fact that the father did not provide that love. And if you read it, in its full context, Isaac loves his son for a reason. He loves it because he had a taste for game. And Isaac's love to some extent is conditional, right? It's conditioned. It requires something in return. It requires him to do something, to be a hunter, to bring him food. As we know later, it says flat out, he brought his father food, and he seems to have a good relationship with his father. It's not a bad thing. But Isaac, by favoring and loving this one son more, it really does give us this sense that Rebecca had to kind of step in and do it. And again, it's my reading of it. It doesn't have to be the case. But Rebecca doesn't say why she loved him. It literally just says she loved him. And from that, I've always kind of taken away that, sometimes this happens, and sometimes parents feel like they have to make up for another parent's lack of concern with that other child. And so sometimes this happens. And again, every family says, well, you loved so-and-so more, and you love, every family does that, right?
Yes.
We have some families on the line right now. So I want to be very careful as I say this, because every family says, everybody says, oh, mom loved you more, or, dad.
You were the favorite. No, I was the favorite. No, you were the favorite. Everybody
has this. And I will tell you that as a parent, and as somebody who's still parenting, in my own house, I will tell you that there are times when you sometimes feel like you compensate you're doing parent compensation, and that you have to step in to do something because the other parent is doing something there, and you have to kind of step in. Obviously, it's more apparent when the kids are all at home, or when the kids are young and they're all in the same house. But there is definitely, a level sometimes of people stepping in and doing things because another parent is either doing something else or not doing something else. And so you kind of feel like, I got to do something here. I got to step in, and I better say something or do something. I better hug this kid right now because the other kid is watching that kid be hugged by the other parents. I'm going to go in and hug this kid. So there is that sometimes where you have to do that. And again, in this case, I don't want to say Rebecca's love is better, but it's not conditional. And one can maybe even make the argument that she had to, because Jacob did not have that same attention from Isaac, which again is interesting, because we assume that, like if you didn't know this line, if you didn't see this line, you would just assume that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and in reality, it's Abraham, Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob. And that's one of the things that I think is so important, is that these archetypes become part of the Jewish consciousness and Jewish soul. And it is this, I'm not going to say that Jewish men have a reputation for being mama's boys, but they do. And so they have that reputation. And I will tell you that it exists more in the Jewish community than it does in other communities. It doesn't mean we're the only people who say that, but there's a reason why we have a song like Yiddish Mama, or we have these crazy, comedic nods to this kind of stuff, where you see these people that are still being coddled by their moms. There's a reason for it. It's because these stereotypes that have existed for a long time, and you can say they go back all the way to the Bible.
Genesis that we're studying, it goes all the way back to Genesis.
It goes all the way back
to the beginning.
Yep. And so Rebecca has a very special place in Jewish history to some extent, and she has this special place in a special relationship with her son Jacob, which again is part of what makes this story so complex, is that we don't talk about Rebecca maybe as much as we should, but she, as we're going to see, she really is the prime mover in our story, and she really has to step in. It kind of begs the question, what if there wasn't a Rebecca? Where would we have gone if it hadn't been for Rebecca? So kind of keep that in mind, why she's such a special person. In the Bible, is a patriarch and matriarch, arguably one of the most important people in Genesis. So now we get into the story, and we're going to finish with this story, even though you probably, well, we'll see. We're definitely going to read this part of the story. So those few lines, there's a whole lot there. But this next scene is a famous scene of the Bible. And the story says, once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open famished. Jacob, and I'm famished right now. As I'm eating this, I realize I haven't had dinner yet. But I don't know if there's a stew waiting for me, but nothing like soup, nothing like a good soup. And that's what Jacob is doing. He's cooking, which, by the way, like if you didn't need to know that Jacob is a tent guy hanging around the house, the guy's actually cooking. That's what it says. He's cooking a stew. And Esau comes in from the open, famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I'm famished," which is why he's named Edom. Now, we already read that he comes out hairy and is red when he comes out, but here we have another reason, which goes back to this red stuff that he is cooking. This is this red soup, this red stew that he is making. And that's why he's also called Edom. And that is the other name for Esau and for his descendants, the Edomites. So this is the origin story of how they're called the Edomites. So he says, "Give me some of that stuff to gulp down." Now, again, this is not the way somebody who, is a very dignified and very polite person would say. They don't say, hey, I'd really like some food. Can you help me, please? He says, "Give me some of that stuff," right? And red stuff. He doesn't even call it food. Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, which is kind of the translation of not even eating it. I want to gulp it down. So not a very civilized way of talking. And again, it says right there, he's coming in from the field, which the rabbis also interpret from not just the sense of hunting, but that he's been out being a randy young man, and that he has been engaged in his normal sexual conquests, which is why he's hungry and is why he is, again, an uncouth gentleman. He's not a gentleman. He's an uncouth young man. He's
I don't
not a
know. They
gentleman.
they always they try to do that to build up Jacob, and I it seems like they villainize Esau quite a bit, and maybe he's just really hungry and he just has been out catching game all day, and Jacob's kind of a jerk for like
But
putting
You could be right, but again, what's given in the story is a lack of "I want to eat, please give me." Well, you could say he does say please. I mean, you're right. It could the word "na" also can be translated is
is a pleading thing. Doesn't
as a,
Moses use the same word for when Miriam gets sick?
Yeah, so "na" can also be pleased, but it's definitely not it's not "I want to eat, can you share some food with me." The interesting thing too about coming in from the field, some people have said, well, that's the hunting field, that's the field where he's out in a euphemistic way, out playing the field. We still use that word in English, right? Playing the field. That there is, though, there's some understanding here, which is that did he have to be, was he in a situation where he would have been really famished? Like, is it it's not like he was out in the mountains, right? It doesn't say it, by saying he's coming in from the field. He's not in a place where there was no food. He could have picked up some wild mushrooms or something. It's not like he's in a place where he'd have to be famished, right? Because if it said, came in from the desert, he came in from the midbar, or he came in from the mountains, that maybe there was no food around. But there's this understanding, like, he's coming in from the field, which is not, he's coming home from work. It's not like he was out in the desert. It's not like he was out, and that's usually the way it's understood. That coming from the field does not
provide
mean
for himself well, and he does have an expectation that Jacob should provide for him, but Jacob takes advantage of the situation.
So let's see exactly. So let's see what happens. So he says, Jacob says to him, "First sell me your birthright." And Esau says, "I'm at the point of death, so what use is the birthright to me?" Now, the interesting part of that, of course, is that people say, well, he spurned his birthright, and he basically said, "I don't care. What difference does it make? I'm so hungry. I'm going to die anyways." So if he's really at the point of death and he really is hungry and he's famished and he came in because he had no food for days, then Jacob no doubt takes advantage of him. But there doesn't seem to be that feeling about it. It seems like Jacob is playing off of his immaturity and his impulsiveness. And so that Jacob, yes, takes advantage of him, no doubt, but his impulsiveness is what makes him do this in the first place. It's what makes him go out without supplies. It's what makes him come back and go, "I got to eat and I don't care. I'm going to die anyway." We read later that he spurns his birthright, that he spurns it. Now, again, does spurning and by the way, if he's out playing the field and out, taking care of his physical needs, then yeah, like, he's asking for it. He literally has put himself in a situation where he shouldn't be like that. And so there is a sense that he deserves it. Now, there's no doubt that we as Jews are going to tell that story. And the Bible is telling this story. The Bible's telling us how Esau wound up the way he did.
And he clearly doesn't value it that much because he's willing to sell it for a bowl of soup.
Yeah. And so and there's no negotiation. He doesn't say, "Hey, look, what are you talking about? I'll pay you double for it, what it's worth, or I'll give you some stuff later." He doesn't say that. He literally says to him, "Yeah, whatever. I'm at the point, I'm going to die." So is he really at the point of death? And that's what he says, which seems to be, again, a guy who doesn't control his impulses and says things that are stupid. Like, are you really at the point of death? You went out today and didn't eat. You're at the point of death. And so his understanding that, oh, what difference does it make? I'm going to die anyways. So that's crazy. That's crazy talk. That's literally somebody who does not value the things that he has. And in this case, it is his place in the birth order that would have given him twice as much as his brother. So whatever Isaac would have when he died gets split up, as we talk about, 3 ways. Esau would have gotten 2/3 and Jacob would have gotten 1/3. That's the way it would have gone down. Now, from this point on, it's the other way around. Jacob gets twice as much as his brother. That's what's going to go down here in this moment. And here's what the next line says. But Jacob said, swear to me first. And so he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. And then it says, then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went his way. Thus did Esau spurn his birthright. Now, the word spurn his birthright is the biblical editorializing of what just happened, which is that he didn't sell his birthright. He didn't give up his birthright. He didn't trade his birthright. He spurned his birthright. He literally tossed it away. And so the understanding here is that if he was just making a trade, or if he sold it, or if he felt he had to give it to him, he wouldn't have used the word that he spurned it. So there's no doubt the Bible itself gives a judgment on this, which is that he spurned it. Look, the Bible also likes to point out, or the Midrash points out, because the Bible does say it, that Esau got not just the stew, but he gave him some bread and he gave him some drink. He didn't just give him the stew, which is all he asked for, is that Jacob actually spread out a table and gave him a meal. So he didn't have to. Esau, give me some stuff.
Esau reminds me of Samson.
Yeah.
Same way, right?
Yep. And the idea of taking something that you want and then just moving on. What's interesting is that Jacob is again in this family dynamic, right? How does he carve out his place? And so what he does is, it seems, and kind of like without reaching for it, he literally has to use his mind, right? He has to outthink his brother, and he has to protect himself, because he seems to understand that this guy is going to roll all over him. And it's kind of conveyed a little bit in this swear to me first, right? Because he knows that his brother is probably, if he's going to confront him, he's going to lie about it. He's going to say, whatever, I just said that. He says, swear. So they literally go through another moment where he swears to him, where he actually says to his brother, okay, I swear, I promise. And it seems like Jacob knows him. And that's why Jacob says, but say it, you got to say it. You got to swear it. So this is the scene. Now, again, this is different than the other scene, which is the scene of the blessing. So this is a two-parter, right? This is a two-part thing. I always remind people, because the stories get conflated in people's minds, and there's two different stories here that build on each other, that definitely have some similar themes, but there's two different stories here, which lead us to, again, this point where Jacob and Esau, have, the two things that have gotten in there that have happened. It's not one thing, it's two things.
But it continues to play out in history. How many times have we heard when a favored son or daughter or family inherits a lot of money and they squander it? They get rid of it. It's not meaningful. They don't feel they deserve it. They're not cognizant of what the value is, and they spurn it.
Yeah.
Still happening today.
It happens in families, and it's happened in business, businesses where we had it in our family. I think every family has it, wherever there's, we only went back, I had to go back a couple of generations, but that my great grandfather's business got, taken over by one of the brothers, and he, of course he ran into the ground, the gambling, all this other stuff, and a fortune's lost. So, people have that, and it's happened in the political world, where people have had, have seen it happen in kingdoms and dynasties, where a son took over and ended up, running the kingdom into the ground, and another brother ended up either picking up the pieces or starting his own, rivalry and going to war against, that king for ruining stuff. So it's
so again, the Torah teaches a lesson for now.
Yeah. And people, it really is a problem when you had societies and families where where families could break apart over possessions.
Mhm.
And it does happen today. I've seen it happen so many times where families will fight over money or property after someone dies. And of course the reality is that you know I try to remind people that the idea that, and it goes back obviously to people's vision of what happens in the Bible, but the idea that today that people deserve something or are entitled to something from their parents is really problematic. It becomes a big uh, big problem for people, and to some extent I tell people it's better off in some cases if you don't have stuff to inherit, because people oftentimes fight over it and it's not worth it. It's not worth the family breaking up over inheritance, and it happens all the time. So people again feel that they're owed something, and if somebody gets something that they didn't get, they can never forgive. So it happens, and it's sometimes it's it brings out the worst in people too. You see the worst sides of them. So this is the situation that is essentially set up from before Isaac even is dying, that this scene happens, and it plays out without him, which is that your property is essentially now going to be split differently than you thought it was going to be, Isaac. Because Isaac, we don't. Isaac doesn't know what's going on here. This happens amongst the kids. So that's this story. Now I will tell you, we have a weird tangential story here that we're going to read. We'll finish with this, and then next week we'll come back and read the other story, the blessing story, which is the other really important part of the Toldot portion. And when we read it as one portion, we read the birthright and the blessing in the same portion. But in this case, next week we'll pick up with the blessing. But here's a weird story that a lot of people forget, or they conflate it with the previous stories about Sarah and Abraham. But here's the scene that we have here in chapter 26. It says there was a famine in the land aside from the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went to Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, in Gerar. So again, are they Philistines? Is this an anachronism? Is it really describing the Canaanites? It doesn't really matter. The fact is he goes to Avimelech. Is it the same Avimelech that his father Abraham and Sarah and his mother Sarah dealt with? Or is it another guy named Avimelech? Is Avimelech more of a title like Pharaoh, which means my father, the king? Is it more of this Canaanite / Philistine king, whatever, who lives in Gerar? Same place, and it's the same place where the earlier story happened with Sarah and Abraham. And it says, though, that this is a different famine. So it definitely is a different time. And here's what it says. The Lord had appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I point out to you. Reside in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. I will assign all these lands to you and to your heirs, fulfilling the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. So God actually comes to Isaac and says, don't go down to Egypt. Don't do what your father did. And don't leave the country. And as we mentioned before, Isaac is the only patriarch who never leaves the land. He doesn't go down to Egypt. Both Abraham and Jacob go down to Egypt. Jacob actually dies in Egypt. And Jacob also goes up to Aram, which is where Abraham lived. So they go both north and south. Isaac doesn't. He's the only patriarch who, number one, never marries another woman, and number two, never leaves the land of Israel. And I will make your heirs as numerous as the stars in the heaven, and assign to your heirs all these lands, so that all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your heirs. Inasmuch as Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my laws, and my teaching, my Torah. And so what's interesting here is, of course, is that he gets the other part of this blessing. I give you this land, and I'm going to make your heirs numerous. There are going to be so many of them. And all the nations, just like I told Abraham at the very beginning, all the nations shall bless themselves by your children, by your descendants. So that's very important. All of these blessings are going to be conferred on you. Again, follow my teachings, keep my charge, just like my mitzvot, just like your father Abraham did. And so it says, so Isaac stayed in Gerar. So he doesn't leave. But when the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister. For he was afraid to say my wife, thinking the men of the place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. Where have we heard this story before? 2 times with Abraham, both in Egypt and in Gerar, and now here it is with Isaac. So it happens 3 times in Genesis, 3 times. And his answer for why he did this, it says right here, will kill me because of her. Now, she is not his sister. He's actually his niece. So remember, Isaac and Bethuel are on the same level on the family tree, right? Isaac, Abraham's son, Bethuel is Nahor's son. So Bethuel is Rebekah's father. That makes Rebekah his his cousin's daughter, not his uncle, his cousin's daughter. So his cousin once removed, the generation below him. So she's not a sister. So that's definitely a lie. Now, you could say sister from the standpoint of they're related, but he says because they'll kill her, they'll kill me and take her. When some time had passed, Avimelech, king of the Philistines, looking out of his window, saw Isaac fondling his wife, Rebekah. Now, before you say, does it really say fondling? No. He definitely sees something that indicates that she is not his sister. However, it is also could be read that he is playing with her. And what's interesting, of course, is that it is a play on his name. His name is Yitzchak, and Metzachek is the same root, is playing with, is having fun with. Any of those things we could say have double entendre as well, but playing with, they've taken it to another level by saying fondle. But even if we said he's playing with his wife, if you wrote that in English, that's enough to do that. I'm just going to see very quickly what my Friedman translation says for the word metzachek, and you can look in your King James if you want to see what the word metzachek is translated as, whether it's playing with. Here is the translation is you see, you gotta love Friedman's translation. Fooling around, in quotes. By the way, good translation in the sense that joking around, and he I'm sure he wrote a little note there. Metzachek is a pun on the name Isaac. So having fun, laughing, all of those things, but fooling around is a good way of saying, was he fooling around with her or was he just having fun? So
whatever it was clearly not his sister.
It's not a sister at this point, right? So they're not playing like brother and sister. So he sees it happening. And again, the implication is he sees it out of the window, which is not, it's like he catches it happening, right? It's not like it's normal. It's like it wasn't supposed to be happening. So Avimelech sent for Isaac and said, so she's your wife. Why then did you say she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I thought I might lose my life on account of her. So he flat out tells her, I thought I'd die. Avimelech said, what have you done to us? One of the people might have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. Now, one of the people, I would have thought that was you. Avimelech, you're the one, you're the one who's number one on the list. So, yeah, he gets panicky. Now, before we heard that they got struck with a plague, right? That was the stuff that happened in Egypt. And then with Avimelech before, the other Avimelech, there's not having kids. All the women can't have kids while this is going on, while Sarah's there. Now, here's what it says. Avimelech then charged all the people, saying, anyone who molests this man or his wife shall be put to death. So leave this guy alone. And the word there is hanogea, which is, again, has a sexual connotation, which is why translated as molest. And then it says, Isaac sowed in that land and reaped 100-fold that same year. The Lord blessed him, and the man grew rich and richer until he was very wealthy. He acquired flocks and herds and a large household, so that the Philistines envied him. Now, the problem then doesn't seem to be so much that there's an almost sexual thing that happens here. It seems as though the problem is he becomes very successful while he's there. So here the problem isn't the sexual part, but the wealthy, as he gets wealthy, the Philistines start hating him. Now, this, again, an archetype, stereotype, this idea that the wealth that this person had made the other people hate him is another issue that we deal with in the Jewish community. And the fact that people will say, hey, if these Jewish people are getting so successful, the envy will lead to an anti-Semitic reaction. And that, of course, is still something we deal with in this world. Is not stopped. And Isaac, again, just as his father did, becomes very successful. And it says, the Philistines stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham, filling them with earth. So their response, the way they get back at Abraham, is they fill up the wells. So the wells were dug by Abraham, and it specifically says Abraham's servants dug them up, but they're Abraham's wells. These are not wells that the Philistines or the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, had dug. These are ones that Abraham had dug, which means they absolutely had no right to do what had happened, what they were doing, which is fill up those wells. Now, we just heard that these guys are not supposed to be molested. Now, is that physical? Well, yeah, obviously, but it's also, you don't bother these people. And they're violating the rule that Avimelech put down. So Avimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you have become too big for us. So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the Wadi of Gerar, where he settled. So he gets out of town. He leaves Gerar. So Avimelech, who originally protected him, says, you can't stay here anymore. And so Isaac leaves. Again, this was so often the case in Jewish history, where the Jews would say, okay, well, we'll get out of there. Well, guess what? Isaac dug new wells, new of the wells, well, actually, which were dug in the days of his father Abraham. He dug those wells, or redug them, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham's death. And he gave them the same names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants digging in the wadi found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. He named that well Esek because they contended with him. So you can see he redug the wells that had been stopped up. That's one thing. And then he also starts digging another well, or his servants dig this other well, and they get more water. So this is not even like the wells that they had dug before, which may or may not have been, freshwater, springs or wells that are tapping into aquifers, that maybe those were wells that, you had to fill up. Those were wells that, that got rainwater collected in them. This is a freshwater well. That's the word that's used here, a be'er mayim. So this is not just a well. This one is actually a well of spring water, be'er mayim. So, but be'er mayim chaim, living water. So this is a freshwater well that is springing forth water. So again, now they claim that it's theirs. They didn't even have it before. It wasn't even a well before. They made it. It's like a new well. And when they dug another well, they disputed over that one too. And so he named it Sinah. And so again, all these names are based on Esek means contention. Sinah means harassment. So the wells take on the names of these places where there were fights. He moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called it Rehoboth, saying, now at last the Lord has granted me ample space. Because Rehov means to increase the land or to get bigger, to spread out wider. And that's what the word Rehoboth means. So finally gets a place. And then it says, and from there he went to Beersheba, which is this other well that his father had originally, we had read, had sworn a pact with Avimelech. So these are stories of Isaac redigging his father's wells, and in some cases digging his own, but mostly uncovering and digging up where his father had dug. And it's an interesting kind of metaphor too, for, as the rabbis kind of deduced, that Abraham had set this wonderful precedent and had made Isaac, given Isaac so much. And in some cases, all Isaac had to do was uncover the truths and uncover the wells of knowledge, and wells, we still say, founts of knowledge that Abraham had been given or had uncovered. But what we read is that it's not necessarily without challenges, that there were challenges that Isaac had to deal with in his life, with his neighbors, with his own family. And in the reality too, is that some of the digging he had to do for himself. And some of the work was done on his own. And so that even if we get, stuff from our families, even if we get stuff from our families, materially and spiritually, and, with whatever gifts we get from them, that we have to do some of the work ourselves. And in some cases, digging a well or redigging a well means that you still have to do some work. It's not just there for you to have water or to have life, but that you actually have to do some of the work yourself. And I think that's, it's been a powerful lesson for me. It's definitely been something I've thought about in my life. And I think, to some extent, all of us in a way are redigging the wells of our parents. Sometimes we realize it, early, and sometimes we realize it later in life when we get to certain places where our parents were and realize, oh, now I know what they meant. Now I know why they always said, wait, just wait, you'll understand one day. A lot of us get to a point, and it's only when we're at that same point, that same well, when we dig it, that we dig it, that we get it, right? It's an interesting thing about life, that even when we revisit some of those places, there's work we have to do when we get there. It's not just there for us. So, and again, unfortunately, sometimes it's our enemies who make it harder for us. Sometimes people working against us make it so that we have to redig these wells. And sometimes they're just been filled up. It's been a long time since we came there. It's been a long time, and you gotta redig. So we'll finish with this last part about it. That night, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am the Lord, I'm the God of your father Abraham. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you, and I increase your offspring for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there, and invoked the Lord by name. And Isaac pitched his tent there, and his servants started digging a well. And Avimelech came to him from Gerar, with Achuzat his counselor, and Phicol the chief of his troops. And Isaac said to him, Why have you come to me, seeing that you have been hostile to me and driven me away from you? And they said, We now see plainly that the Lord has been with you. And we thought, let there be a sworn treaty between our two parties, between you and us. Let us make a pact with you, that you will not do us any harm, just as we have not molested you, but have always dealt kindly with you and sent you away in peace. From now on, be you blessed of the Lord. So he says, we haven't molested you. We've dealt kindly with you. That's not exactly true based on what we just read, but they didn't kill them. They didn't beat them up, but they finally realized that no matter where this guy goes, he's always going to have God with him. And so Abimelech, seeing this, says, we better have a pact with you too. And just like, our ancestors kind of, our previous generations, doesn't say it, but, we had a pact with your father. Let's have a pact with you too. And they made for them a feast, and they ate and drank. And early in the morning, they exchanged oaths. Isaac then bade them farewell, and they departed him in peace. And that same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. And they said to him, we have found water. And he named it Shiva. And therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. And we're going to finish with that, which is the fact that the place Beersheba gets a name again, which has to do with Isaac, that Isaac's name and Isaac's naming of it happens now here as well, which is, as you see, the Shiva is connected here, not to the seven lambs, but to the oath that's made here. So you can see that there's two versions of how Beersheba got its name, or it's a repetition of the story that Abraham dedicates it, but then again, so does Isaac. And so Isaac has to kind of go through the same ritual as his father did. It doesn't really last until, through the next generation. The next generation has to redo this too. So this is a message, it's a lesson that we redig our parents' wells. We sometimes have to do the same work they do. Sometimes that feels welcoming, and it feels inspiring, and sometimes it feels frustrating. Sometimes it feels like, really, do I have to go back and do the same thing that they already did? And we hope we don't have to. We hope we don't have to fight the same battles that our parents did, but sometimes we do. And sometimes sometimes it's part of our experience in life that it's just we have to do it. And sometimes I catch myself having the same conversations with some of the same people that my dad did, and I think to myself, didn't my dad have that same conversation? Didn't he have that pact? Didn't he have that agreement? And then I find out, what, the pacts sometimes only last as long as somebody can get away with getting out of that pact, and it still exists. I'm telling you, I've had conversations where I've literally hung up the phone and gone, man, I remember my dad having that same conversation. And sometimes it's fun, and sometimes it makes me happy, and other times it's frustrating, and it makes me sad that I have to have the same discussion, and that what I thought was was an agreement or was an understanding wasn't the case. And so these things, I can tell you, do happen in life. Sometimes, again, when you follow, and sometimes we're following in the footsteps, you find yourself doing some of the same stuff, even with some of the same people. So I can tell you, it definitely resonates. It definitely resonates with me. A lot of this text doesn't seem to be like, what's the importance of Isaac redigging his wells? But there is a huge kind of psychological level to this. that I think all of us who ever, have considered where we are compared to where our parents are, where we think about our lives in relation to those who came before us. Are we making the same mistakes? Are we going through the same patterns of behavior? Are we living the same cycles of relationships? Or, are we able to grow and not have to do that, or not repeat the same mistakes, if you will? And some of them are our own doing, because sometimes we fill up those wells ourselves. Sometimes all we had to do was just not fill up that well that our parents had dug, and they already did the hard work. We didn't have to go back and fill it back up and redig it, but we do. So there are a lot of levels to this that are much deeper and much richer than just a well and just water, because it's really the life and the level of understanding our lives as being, in some cases, the dreams and the expressions of those who came before us. So again, I hope we don't have to do too much hard work, but that we find fulfillment in digging these wells. And again, as it's been pointed out, and I have one of the books that I shared a long time ago about bibliodrama that was written by Peter Pitzela, who was the father of bibliodrama, of taking psychodrama and applying it to the Bible text. His book is called Digging the Wells, and Digging Our Father's Wells. And it's really about, again, reading the Torah and understanding that the Torah is the constant well of knowledge that we dig from. And in many cases, we're redigging the same wells. Fortunately, we have the commentaries and we have, the lessons of those who came before us, but we all have to do some of the work ourselves. So thank you, everybody, for doing a little digging today and being along on this journey through from one well to the next. So next week, we're going to pick up with the very end of this story. And we're not going to end on a sad note, which is that Esau was marrying other women, but we'll get to that. And we're going to read the story of the blessing and Esau and Jacob with their father and their mother and Rebecca in that story of the blessing. So that's next week. We read that. And that's really the Isaac story of the wells, my friends, is Isaac's story. We really don't have much of Isaac by himself. That's really one of the only stories where his kids aren't involved or his parents aren't openly involved. They're in the background. But that's really Isaac's only actions are digging these wells. All right, everybody, stay safe and healthy and positive. And let's hope that next week, as we get together, and again, join us Friday night. We're going to have a special live Zoom service at 8:00 our time. We'll have a taped service as well, but we'll have a live Zoom service at 8 p.m. Please join us for that, because we're going to have some songs and we're putting together a special service where we also can, I think, together as a community, express our thanks and gratitude that this Shabbat, well, and God forbid anything happens between now and Shabbat, that what happened last Shabbat did not result in death and destruction of our people. So
That was good.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for welcoming
Thank you.
Deb to our
Yeah,
class.
absolutely. And blessings on our friends in Texas. Stay safe. Don't mess with
Thanks
Texas.
very much.
Thank you.
Good
Don't
to
mess
see you,
with Texas.
Cheryl. Good to see you, Deb.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Love you,
Thanks a lot.
Joyce.
Bye-bye.